About healthy boundaries in recovery today. And we've already seen a couple examples. You know, first of all, we started at 9 o'clock. Good meeting starts on time and ends on time. We said the Serenity Prayer, which is an extreme example of healthy boundaries. And then we talked about the boundaries that life imposes upon us that we have no choice over. Know what I mean? With the cheaters? So life is about boundaries. And the idea behind boundaries is that they keep us safe. And before I get going too far, I'd like to have Mark and James come up. I got some handouts I'd like to hand out, and some pens if you need a pen. And on one side is kind of the stuff we're going to cover. On the other side, there's some questions for you. We're going to have a little of your participation in writing these questions. And these guys have to do what I tell them. That's part of the boundaries because they're working with me. You want to make sure you make use of these guys.
But I don't have to do what he tells me, even though he's my husband. I have good boundaries.
We dispute that issue. A lot of dispute. So the first things I want to say is that boundaries keep us safe. The idea behind boundaries is they're like a fence with a gate in it. A fence is there to protect, to hold in, to keep out. But you have to have a gate so that you can open it up and let the good in, and while at the same time shut it and keep the bad out. And so most people are raised in a home, and nobody's raised in a perfect home, but mostly we're raised and we learn boundaries from our family of origin. And we think that innately we have healthy boundaries, but that's not necessarily true. I've found that boundaries require deliberate, intentional, and rational planning in my life. Especially as an addict, I've been all over the place. I've been one of those guys that is pretty much whatever feels good, whatever suits me, whatever I think I can get out of life, that's what I'm going to do. And when you withheld what I wanted, there was something wrong with you. So my boundaries were really askew. We got everything handed out? Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to start with some examples of healthy boundaries, or what I want to keep out with boundaries. These are the things I want to keep out. One of them is the number one you'll see on your list there is the slippery places that can cause me to lose my sobriety. So there are overt places and covert places. There are places where I need to be intentional about going. I need to make sure that it's a safe place for me, especially early in sobriety. But even with a lot of years of sobriety, I still need to be intentional about where I go, who I hang out with, and what situations I put myself in so that I'm safe. It is very important to me. And then there's those things that are inside of me, those kind of under the covers things, those places where my thinking is a little shady. And I don't know if you have shady thinking, but Lord Almighty, this guy does. And so I need to have the kind of feedback from people that is healthy, that can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. I need to be willing to seek and accept that feedback. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit, but I'm going to let my wife come up now.
Again, hello, my name is Liz. I'm an addict and an alcoholic. Hi. Okay, so first of all, I don't like glasses, and the reason is because I can't see you when I have them on because I use them for reading. So I'm supposed to do this, right? Okay, anyway. So I need to take them off and on. I hope that's not too distracting for you guys, but my husband printed these, and he printed them really tiny, tiny letters, you know? So anyway, okay. So I'm going to go to, on your sheets, on the front page, I'm going to go to number 2 and give some idea about resistance. So, you know, first of all, as addicts, we do not like to delay gratification at all. I mean, it can be, you know, it was drugs and alcohol, and now, I mean, it could be, I want to buy that gorgeous shirt, or I want that very cool car. Or maybe I want to move into a house that costs me about 3 times more than I can afford. We don't like to delay gratification. But remember, we talked about recovery being an inside job. So when we start to set boundaries for other people as well as for ourselves, we're going to experience what's called resistance. We're going to have outside resistance and inside resistance. And outside resistance, obviously, is the resistance we get from other people, and inside resistance is the resistance we get from ourselves. Every time we begin to set a boundary and a limit, we're going to experience this somehow, because it's not the way we're used to thinking, the way we're used to living. One of the main forms of resistance is anger. And it can be resistance, anger from other people when we set boundaries for them or limits, but can also be anger within ourselves, especially when we're in conflict. There are two psychologists that wrote just a couple little paragraphs on this, and I want to read them very quickly to you, but they're just absolutely amazing. This one is angry reactions. The most common resistance one gets from the outside is anger. People who get angry at others for setting boundaries have a character problem. Now, I know that the first step deals with drugs and alcohol. All the other steps deal with our character. We're here to grow our character in a healthy way. And if someone gets mad at me for setting a boundary by saying no or even yes to something they don't want me to say yes to, they may get angry. We may get angry when someone does that for us. Self-centered, this is the person that's getting angry at us. They think the world exists for them and their comfort. They see others as extensions of themselves. I'm going to flip back and forth between our own anger and others. We may do the same thing. Maybe we don't know where we stop and that other person starts. And it gets all messed up. It's called enmeshment. It kind of like gets this way. And when that person gets angry, how do we respond to that? When they hear no, the other person, they have the same reaction a 2-year-old has when deprived of something. Bad mommy. We've got a ton of grandkids. 13th one's on the way. And I was, it's all your fault.
Be fruitful and multiply.
I was watching my little 3-year-old the other day, and it was nap time, and so she had this stuffed animal that I knew what would happen. If I gave her 2 stuffed animals when she went to bed, she'd play with them like this, right? If I let her have one, it was fine. So I said, it's time for night-night. I'm going to take away that stuffed animal. She stood there with her hands on her hips and yelled at me, "Bad grandma." And I'm like, what? We don't have to be taught this stuff, do we? It's in us. And that's why when we get clean and sober, it is our responsibility to examine this and then get help if we can't deal with internal boundaries or external boundaries. To proceed with this, when she said bad Grammy, but say an older person says bad mommy because they're acting like a 2-year-old, they feel as though the one who deprives them of their wishes is bad, and they become angry. They are not righteously angry at a real offense, because, there is that type of anger, but as addicts we know we can't hold on to that. They're angry not because someone's done something to them. They're angry because someone will not do something for them. That's a big difference. Their wish is being frustrated, and they get angry because they have not learned to delay gratification or to respect others' freedoms. The angry person has a character problem, whether it's them or me. And you know what? If I reinforce their anger, whatever their problem is, trust me, it's going to return tomorrow and the next day in other situations. So if I don't learn to say no when I really want to say no, if I just succumb to someone's anger, I promise you they're going to use that again the next day on me. So you got to remember, it's not the situation that's making the person angry, but the feeling that they are entitled to things from others. They want to control others, and as a result, they have no control over themselves, okay? So the angry person doesn't have any control over themselves. So when they lose their wished for control over someone, they literally lose it. They get angry. The first thing you need to learn, and this is important, is the person who is angry at you for setting boundaries is really the one with the problem. Not you, it's them. Maintaining your boundaries is good for other people. It will help them learn what their families of origin did not teach them, and that's to respect other people. Second, I want you to think about this. I want you to view anger realistically, okay? Anger is only a feeling inside that other person. It can't jump across the room and hurt you, and I'm not talking about physical violence right now. It cannot get inside of us if we say no, unless we allow it. Staying separate, and this is vitally important too, as you grow in your understanding of boundaries. Staying separate from another person's anger is vitally important. We're going to talk about that more later. Let the anger be in the other person. He will have to feel his anger to get better, or she. I'm not being prejudiced here, or biased, I should say. So, you know what? The only way that person is going to start to change is if they feel their anger. That's how they're going to get better. If I rescue him from it, or even if I take it on myself, the angry person will not get better, and I will be in bondage. Third, do not let anger be a cue for you to do something. People without boundaries respond automatically to the anger of others. They rescue, they seek approval, or they get angry themselves. There is great power in inactivity. I tell my sponsees so often, if they're in an anger-filled relationship, do nothing. Leave the room, do nothing. You have great power in that, believe it or not. Don't let that out-of-control person be the cue for you to change your course. Just allow him to be angry and decide for yourself what you need to do.
Okay? So we're going to move on to number 3 here. Number 3, for me, is one of the most important things that I have to do in my life today and every day. And I have to be aware of this. It's a negative self-thought life that compromises my well-being, my inner well-being. I love that reaching out that we read last night. That whole thing is one of my favorite of all readings that I've ever heard in any recovery anywhere. And I especially like the last paragraph. I think the whole thing is great. The last paragraph goes like this. Something else I have done is I've forgiven myself. I've forgiven myself for being an addict. I've forgiven myself for all the damage I did to my life, to my physical health, and to my career and finances. But most of all, I've forgiven myself for all the horrible, negative, unloving things I have felt about myself. It was not until I offered and accepted my own forgiveness that I was truly able to grow in sobriety. And the truth is, for an addict like me, with all the damage and all the harm and all the things I've done, I have learned to beat myself up in a way that no other human being could possibly do. If some of you people talk to me the way I've talked to myself, I'd have punched you in the nose. And it's just true. Sometimes I've been my own worst enemy. And just because I've been clean for a number of years doesn't mean that negative self-thought life will go away. So I have to be armed and ready to do battle against those kind of thoughts. And what I've done is I've gone so far as to write down and really take to heart some things I call core beliefs. And so when I start hearing these negative thoughts, I'll go to my core beliefs. Number 1 core belief is that I'm a child of God. I'm not a piece of garbage. I'm loved and I'm okay. I'm loved without strings. That means that I'm loved just because I'm loved, not because I deserve it, but because I am. Number 2 is that my life has purpose. There's a reason why I'm here. All the mistakes I've made, everything I've done has a purpose and can be useful and can be helpful to myself and to others if I'm willing to learn from it. And number 3 is that my life has meaning. It's not an accident that I'm here. There's meaning to my life. What I do, what I say, how I think, how I behave, how I relate to other people is very meaningful in this world, and it makes a difference. And when I start talking bad to myself, I'll go to those core beliefs and I'll just start repeating them and I'll just start thinking about them. And I'll go over and over and over them again, because what I've found is I can't think something negative and positive about myself at the same time. And so that's one boundary I have with myself, is I will not listen to negative self-thinking, and I will fight it with positive self-reinforcement.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. That kind of leads me into a little story about myself. Can you guys hear me? Okay. You can hear him, I know. Okay. So this is a little story that was quite revealing to me. Many years ago, I started my recovery 28 years ago. I now have 10 years sobriety. And so it took me a while to get this thing. But many years ago, I went into therapy, and it was for some childhood sexual abuse that happened to me. And I remember my therapist asking me if I had good boundaries. Well, first of all, I had no idea what the heck she was talking about. Next thing I know, and I just kind of sat there and I said, yeah, I guess so. Next thing I know is she got up from across the room, came over, I'm sitting on my chair, she sat on my lap and put her arm around the back of my neck and put her nose, 2 inches from mine. And she sat there. And you know what I did? Nothing. You got it. Absolutely nothing. I don't even know what I was feeling, honestly. And finally, she got up and walked back and sat down in her chair, and she said, I think you might have a problem with boundaries. I went, whoa. That was my first experience with understanding that there are results to childhood trauma that takes place. There are results to, like he said, to the way we beat ourselves up to begin with. Another result is called contempt. So I have a great way of developing contempt, or we do, or you do, when we're faced with having to set boundaries. Maybe we're not used to it, or we don't even know what they are. We develop contempt of other people, things, and ideas. We develop contempt of recovery and spiritual conceptions. And what contempt produces is a lack of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. This is why the program stresses so much that we need to examine our honesty, our open-mindedness, and willingness. And so I'm going to take us to the big book, Spiritual Experience, page 570, and this is one of my very, very, very favorite quotes. And I've tried to memorize this, and I've done fairly well, but I'm going to read it today. I'm a little nervous. So it says here on page 568, it says, there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man or woman in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Now, we may develop contempt out of fear of lack of safety. There are many reasons we do that. Maybe it's just our pride. You know, we work on those things when we do our 4-step, and if you haven't done one, believe me, it's going to be a major relief when you do it. So, as far as the contempt of the spirituality goes and recovery conceptions, you know, again, it's am I just willing, just one little inch of willingness to desire to be honest, and that is that I need a power greater than myself. You don't have to, you know, what do they say? How do you eat an elephant? Right, one bite at a time. You don't have to get this thing all at once. You can get it very slowly. It says sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And one is not better than the other, because everything we do in recovery has meaning for our future lives.
You know, I love Clint Eastwood. He one of my favorite. I like all his movies, but I like the Dirty Harry movie where he's going to shoot a guy, and he says a man's got to know his limitations. You know, some good self-boundaries. So we're going to move on to part 2, examples of what I want to let in through my boundary gates. So we're going to be talking about recovery allies and recovery enemies. There are things that are good for us, things that are on our side, and there are things that are against us and want to keep us from getting healthy. The first ally I want to talk about is regular attendance at CA meetings. You would think I wouldn't have to talk about that. You know, you would think that people in recovery would get this very foundational point of recovery is that you got to go to meetings. And I see it all the time. The first thing that starts a relapse is in the head, of course, but after that, the next thing is I quit going to meetings. That's what people tell me. I quit going to meetings. I see people with a lot of years that just stop going to meetings, and then they wonder why they feel apart and alone. I can't tell you that they have to go to meetings, but I can tell you that I need to go to meetings for my well-being. It's a boundary that I set for myself. I need to go to meetings if I want to be well, if I want to continue to grow, if I want to be more than I am today. It's not just enough that I have 28 years of sobriety, because something new is going to come up in my life, and I'm going to need to have the support and the means to grow through the next situation that comes up in my life. And I want to encourage everybody in this room and anywhere else that if you start thinking that maybe you don't need to go to meetings, ask somebody else about it.
And that is precisely what happened to me. I had 6 years sobriety, and I was sponsoring people. I was very involved, very much into service work. And some of my issues from my childhood started coming up, and instead of getting help, you know, I kind of isolated, and I stopped going to meetings. And I was in and out for 9 years. And let me tell you, that is the most grueling, debilitating way to live. And I wanted so bad to get sober again, but it's like I just couldn't. I wasn't willing to suffer the pains of the emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual withdrawals in order to get well. The day did come when that happened for me, thank my higher power, and I'm here today telling you about it. So that's a good thing. Okay, so we're in the second section. Say that. Don't say that. Anyway, something weird might come out. You know, Mike was talking about, so our boundaries are like a fence around us, okay? But if we don't have a gate that lets the good in and keeps the bad out, then we're going to be isolated, and we don't want to do that. This whole program is about connectiveness. The entire program, connectedness with each other and connectedness with your higher power. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. But along those lines, in order to be connected, I need to be open to receive the suggestions of the program. Like he said, go to meetings. Very simple. Get a sponsor. Work the steps. How am I going to receive the suggestions if I don't really develop a strong support group around me? And that means I need to find a group of people that I feel close to. And the only way I can do that is to show up, and to show up over and over again in the same place. So I don't mean you don't try different meetings out. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying find yourself one group of people that you feel are your like family. I know we're all family in here, that's true, and it's so cool because I can walk up to someone and give them a hug, and I know they get me, and you know I get you, and that is an absolute miracle, and I believe that's how we were created to be in the beginning, and we kind of messed it up a little bit, but you know what? Today we have a chance to be restored. Willingness, number 3 on the second section, is willingness to let change happen in me and others. And that really falls into boundaries. So you know what? I've seen this happen over and over and over with people. First of all, to want to be in a relationship, and I'm talking about, a romantic relationship is normal. We were created, like you said, be fruitful and multiply, right? But, I don't recommend that at the very beginning. I remember one of the first, probably the first 5 meetings I went to. My sponsor would walk in the door and she said, "You see that group of men over there? Yeah, they're hanging around. See that group of women? Yeah." She says, "You sit over there." And I'm like, what's the problem? I mean, because that's how I was used to relating. I mean, whatever your preference is, that's how I was used to getting my needs met. And not only that, I had to figure out what they needed from me. And I needed to learn how to connect and be vulnerable with another person and have it be reciprocal. It doesn't have to be, you do this for me, I do this for you. So I had to start to learn to develop boundaries. I already told you what happened in my therapist office because I was very messed up around that kind of stuff. So a lot of women in early recovery think, and I don't know, I could have taken that, what my sponsor said in a misunderstanding type of way, but it's not that that's not normal. We are made to be like that. Here, this is better, isn't it? Yeah. We're made to be that way. But we don't know sometimes how to swing our gate open or closed, and it takes time to learn to do that. So you're not bad for wanting to be in a relationship when you first get into recovery. I mean, that is really normal to want that. But give yourself a chance. I always tell my sponsees, look, this first year you are in a hospital. When you're in that hospital bed in the hospital, you're getting surgery, you ain't thinking about romance. At least you shouldn't be. You need to be thinking about getting well, right? So that's what you need to be doing. And trust me, you will begin to see, as you work these steps and time goes on, you'll begin to see why you end up allowing anger to control you or letting someone else's anger control you. All those fears, we have to start to learn as we do our 4-step, our fear list. What are we really afraid of? We're afraid of being abandoned. That's why we let that person's anger manipulate us, that kind of stuff. But you know what they say, when you get into a relationship too early, you have twice the baggage and half the control. So you need to think about that. Yeah, I think my part's done. Go right ahead.
All right, so number 4 is the regular use of prayer and meditation to improve my thought life. I constantly confused my feelings with my thoughts when I was first in recovery, and there's a huge difference. My feelings are things that happen that I'm not in control of. However, I can process my feelings. My thoughts are things that come upon me that generally I've practiced so long that they like to keep coming back. And they are things that I can actually change. I am not a victim of this anymore. And so I use prayer to deal with my anxiety. I use prayer to deal with my worries. I use prayer to deal with all that stuff. And the thing about prayer is it draws me closer to a place of where my emotional well-being, my feelings, are even and level. Meditation, the way I meditate is a reflective, contemplative way. It may be different from the way other people do, and that's fine, but I do it in a reflective, contemplative way because I need to learn to direct and focus my thoughts. Because when I'm unfocused, oh my gosh, you can only imagine where my mind wants to go. So I deliberately try to control my mind so that when I'm in that place with that negative self-talk, I can go back to my core beliefs and I can say, once again, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is how things work, this is how a recovery person would deal with this situation. Number 5, truthful input from people that I trust, like my sponsor. Oh boy, I was a problem for him. And the first thing he taught me was that I had to learn to sense my defensiveness. When people said things to me and something rose within me, that was called defensiveness, that wanting to lash back, that, oh no, no, that's not right, no. And then he told me that I had to learn to curb my defiance. And I said, who said, what? What? What do you mean? What are you talking about? Thank God that guy had the patience to be able to deal with a maniac like me. Another thing he taught me was how to examine my thoughts, my feelings, and my motives. We talked a lot about my motives. He'd ask me, why are you doing this? And I'd try to snow him. I'd tell him the biggest bunch of garbage lies. And he'd sit back and say, come on, knock it off. And you know, eventually what happened is I'd start telling myself that garbage, and I'd hear that voice of his, come on, knock it off. And I could start examining the truth of my motives and what was going on. It's an incredible way to live, but it takes a lot of process. It takes other people. There is absolutely no way that we can live this life alone. And when I try to live this life alone, and I want to make sure you notice that some of these boundaries have been external, having to do with people and things outside of ourselves, and some are internal, having to do with what we allow ourselves to think and believe. And next we're going to talk about relationship and or marriage boundaries. I'm sure everybody here has been in a relationship that has just been as sweet and as lovely as the first month, and years and years and years, the romance, the greatness, the good feelings. I'm sure that it's just been just a nice ride in your relationship with no work at all. Hasn't been that way for us. You're up, honey.
Uh-oh, I'm up now?
Yeah, you got to follow that.
Oh, man, okay. Well, you know, we talk about having a picnic, right? We've been married 26 years. We met at a treatment center. But I have to do a disclaimer there. We literally were friends for 3 years. First time I'd ever done a relationship in a healthy way in my life, at least the best that I could. And wait till you hear this. He's my fourth husband. Yeah. But it stuck, you know, and what's so great about it is we came up with some boundaries and limits at the very beginning because we both had multiple marriages. You know, I didn't just live with him. I just married him. You know, I mean, what's the difference, right? I mean, that's just about how it was. I mean, I didn't know how to be in a marriage. I didn't know how to give and take. When we were first married, he was my rival, my competition, because that's the way I used to view men. I objectified them. That's a word that I'm really looking into more and more. And I started it a couple years ago, but think about how we objectify each other. We depersonalize everyone into our rival. We can depersonalize anybody. You know, we can look at them and think, they are what I think you are, rather than trying to understand who they are. So one of our boundaries was that no matter what, we were not going to cut and run. You know, I mean, you know, I planned to leave when I went through my about fourth step, I mean, crazy stuff, and we were going to sell the house and divide things up, but we never did it because that was something that we had really, really agreed on at the very beginning. I went to law school and got my paralegal degree, and I became a domestic violence and sexual unit advocate at the courthouse, and I worked for a lot of family and criminal attorneys. I was a criminal investigator, and so I learned a lot about domestic violence. I was in an 8-year marriage where I was in the hospital, put in the hospital a couple times because of him, and so one of the rules that we have is no name calling or yelling. Now, does that mean we've never ever done that? No, but I tell you the truth. I used to fight like that. We have very, very, very few times done that to each other. In all these years, it's just incredible. The next deal is no physical threats or actions. That has never happened, especially since he came up in a household that was very violent. And, you know, we've never done that to each other. And then the third one is it's okay to take a break during heated discussions to calm down. So my suggestion is if you're in a relationship that you don't feel safe at whatever level, you go talk to somebody about it, get some feedback, because most of the time when we are in one like that, or that's very violent, we are afraid. We don't know whether our judgment's sane because we've lost our identity. Remember where I talked about where we stop and the other person starts? We've lost that. And so you can get a restraining order. It can be short term. There is so much help out there. You can go online. You can look up Center for Battered Women. And let me tell you, I put together restraining orders for men where their wives were abusive to them. It doesn't matter what gender you are. And so, there's help out there. I just want you to know that. Never be afraid to ask for help, and please do it. Just, even if you got to grab somebody and just talk to them. It will lead you to the next step, I promise you.
So the fourth part here is that we are committed to each other and to the concept of us. You know that when you're in a relationship and you're really loving each other, you're actually literally handing the keys to your gate to that other person. Remember the gate I talked about in our boundary fences? You're literally giving her or him the keys to your gate, and you're allowing that person inside in a way that nobody else is going to occupy, in a place that is really sacred. It's really a depth of who you are in your very inner being. And the only way that's really going to be healthy is if you're committed to that concept of us. We're on each other's side. We're for each other. The fifth one, if we hit a major roadblock, we need to get help to get through it. So my wife has told you how much time she has. She's told you that we've been married for 26 years. She hit a roadblock that she couldn't get through for a while. She relapsed. And that put me in a place where I had to decide what I needed to do. And, to be honest, the thought of leaving, of course it came. That's the easy thing to do. I can leave. I've left 100 times. I can run. I can walk away. But I was committed to the concept of us. And so what I did is I got help. After a while, after I got through my anger and my feeling alone and my self-pity party, all that stuff, because that's what happens and that's the process, what I did was I went and I got help. I got some therapy. I went to Al-Anon. I got in codependence groups, and I started working on my part of the relationship. My part of us. Her using was her part. My response to that, my feelings about that, my crazy thinking around that was my part. And the only way for me to get through that was to deal with what was going on in here and in here. And as a result of that, I was able to last through 9 years of marriage where she wasn't fully available because of drug use. So if I can do it, I'm telling you what, anybody can do it. But I can't do it alone, and I don't think anybody can do it alone in a healthy way. But I had to also, at the same time, now I'm not saying that I quit going to meetings too, because at the same time that I was attending to my codependent issues, I had to attend to my addiction issues so that those didn't get me in trouble. My primary issue is always going to be addiction, and I always need to attend to that and make sure I'm getting my treatment for that. We strive to own our own good and bad parts in order to be healthy. Can you imagine how I thought during that time that it was all her fault and she was all bad and I was all good? It's just absolutely insane. I'm not all good. And even today, she'll probably tell you that I still struggle with that. I have to own my bad parts. I have to realize that I make mistakes. I'm not a mistake, but I make mistakes. And then I have to own that, and I have to deal with that. I have to set things right, and I have to move on. Our program tells us how to do that. It's very deliberate on how we can fix the mistakes we make. and it works. And when I do that, when I own my own mistakes, I give her room for her to own her mistakes so that she can get healthy too. And eventually that's what happened. Somebody else's turn.
Yep. Somebody else. Okay, so it says here, number 7, our personal, you notice how he doesn't put the toilet seat down either, well, so he doesn't move the microphone in the right spot either. Anyway, don't record that, okay?
I'm glad that's recorded.
Anyway, number 7, our personal recoveries are the building blocks of our relationships. So remember how I was talking about at the beginning, when you first get into recovery, you got to learn to be part of a whole. That's what happened for me. I had to learn to be part of the fellowship. I had to learn to be part of a larger extension of me, but yet know. They call it differentiation. It's just this fancy word again for knowing, what belongs to me and what belongs to you. But I had to learn that. And that's why, again, it is so important that you take the time to give yourself whatever you need, whatever opportunities you need to get well, so that when you do finally find that person, or even if you don't, if your service work is satisfactory enough to you and your ability to sponsor others it fills you up, even then you still need to know where you stop and they start. I mean, it took me many years to understand how to sponsor other women, and not feel, I've been fired, I can't tell you how many times, honestly. At first time I was like, oh my gosh, and do I have time for one little quick story? So there's this woman, keep coming to the meeting, she keeps drinking, and I remember going up to her and saying, you know what, because I've told my sponsors to do that, go offer yourself as their sponsor. So that's what I did. And she didn't want one. Finally, I talked her into it. So she comes to my house for our first meeting. She sits down on the couch, and she says, I said to her, how are you doing today? Well, there she goes off on this rant about how everybody's messing her up. They're doing this or that. Her boyfriend's doing this. Her son's doing this. And I remember when she was done and looked at her, I said, you know what? This is so exciting. Eventually, you're going to get to not to have to blame anybody for how you feel. This is no exaggeration. She took one look at me. She got up, turned around, and left. And I never saw her again. Now, I could have gone, oh my gosh, but at least I finally realized, you know what, if somebody doesn't want it, don't force them, right? That was a pretty funny story. What I wanted to share with my summation statement, how much longer do we have, honey, time-wise? 10 minutes total. Okay, so I wanted to share this. I wrote this. I thought about this. I prayed about it, and I thought about it. And so that's why I'm going to read it, because I wanted to come out the way I wanted it to. And this is it. If I allow myself the opportunities to renew my mind, because that's what recovery is, renewing of our minds, to accept the healing power from my higher power, the fruits or the results of this renewal will be to respect others' boundaries and to have the strength to set my own boundaries and therefore respect myself. And that's why I will continue to work on my boundary. It's very important to me.